Hello everybody and welcome back to another Hellbound Garage. Today the goal is to get the fuel system all buttoned up for the Datsun, as well as hopefully get a large majority of electrical back into the car. So stay tuned. Now originally I was supposed to be working on the Tundra and finishing getting that vehicle 100% road legal before snow falls, but Mother Nature has not been cooperating lately, so we're going to be in the garage working back on the Datsun. And who knows, maybe by the time the Tundra is done, there will be snow on the ground, but that's anybody's guess. The first thing that we're going to focus on the Datsun is filling that hole down there. Right there. Yeah, filling that. Because, well, that's where the fuel tank goes. So let's get into what I have going on for that. Alright, so I have all the pieces kind of laid out, and I will explain what's going on, and then we'll get to putting it all in the car. So the very first thing is the core of it is the fuel cell bladder itself. Now this one's from Fuel Safe. As I've talked about in previous videos, I bought this used on Craigslist when the factory gas tank had all kinds of problems, and this was the cheapest way for me to get a good fuel tank, and I bought it for like 20 bucks because it was expired, and that's okay because even in the kind of racing that I'm planning on doing, if it was within a certain year range, being expired was okay. That is no longer the case. This is super expired, so I'll have to get a new one of these. They still do make them, so I'm set. Now the next piece of the puzzle for this thing all relates to safety. So this is the fuel cell fuel cell tank. I'm not really sure what you want to call it. But anyways, in order to have one of those, you have to have one of these. Now, if you look on Fuel Safe's site, they actually give you the dimensions on building your own. So you can either buy this whole thing brand new as a complete unit and spend buku money, or you can be like my DIY self, find their designs on their website and build it yourself, which is what I did there. Now, this by itself is not enough safety for this car, because the car is a hatchback and there is no rear seat separating the fuel cell from the driver. You have to have some kind of a firewall or bulkhead, something to make sure that this does not come in contact with the driver. If anything happens, if a fire starts, this has got to be separate from them, which is where this guy comes into place. So this is my fuel cell firewall or bulkhead, whatever you want to call it, and this sits on top of all of this and keeps it separate from the driver. Alright, so looks pretty odd having that giant hole right there, right? Well, that's where this guy comes into place. So this guy is a fuel cell top that I built myself. You can also buy these on Fuel Safe's website, but they cost a lot of money, and well, mine's a particular application that I just decided it was cheaper and better to build one myself. So we have a Summit Racing sending unit, which is what I'm holding, as well as an angled elbow, and I'll get to that in a second, along with the in and out AN fittings, and then we have a rollover vent valve, which is another safety thing that you have to have when you have a fuel cell. Now this, believe it or not, is like my third try at this. This is the first time I've made it of aluminum, and actually the way you're supposed to do it. If you look here, my very first attempt, because that didn't come with a top, because you can continue to reuse and reuse and reuse, it didn't come with a top, so I had to build one. And I had this piece here as a template. This goes inside the fuel cell, and that's where your bolts clamp onto to hold everything in place. So I had that as a template, and I built this. And this is actually the second one that I've built. And these are out of steel, as you can tell, they're made of rust at this point. And the first time that I built one, you can see here, I used RTV, which is no good on gas. Gas beats RTV. And then the second time when I finally got the fuel sending unit, this guy here, I remade to this one. And this one worked pretty well with the cork gasket that I made. And the big hole actually used the factory gas cap. Now, originally, being in Arizona, along with emissions testing, the other thing that they check is the gas cap. And they pressurize the system, make sure it's all good. They do some things. But my gas cap, they can't do that with because it's an old style. But in order for you to make sure that you pass that part of the test, well, I had to use the factory gas cap. So I literally modified it to fit the top of the fuel cell. That way there was zero ifs, ands, or buts about my gas cap. Because if I had used my current setup that I just finished building, I'd be an absolute fail because it uses an aftermarket gas cap. If you can't see the reoccurring theme, Phoenix DMV issues were like the downfall of this car staying anywhere close to stock. Alright, so with this elbow that points it towards the back side of the car, and well, you can see the big hole that now is in the rear of my car, and that is for this guy here. So this guy sits flush in here. Yeah, well, kind of like that. And then this is the vent for the rollover valve. I didn't want it vented anywhere inside the cabin, so it came out here. It works fine. Everything is designed for this all to work. And then the last piece is going to be this guy, which is a reducer with 2 different sizes of fuel fill hose. Believe it or not, that stuff is really expensive. It's surprising how expensive it is, but hey, race car stuff. So the last thing that I should probably talk about is how the fuel's picked up from the bottom of the fuel cell. So like I said, I had those right there, those in and out fittings. One is a barb, and that is so you can use the manufacturer equipped pickup. Their pickup is a little screen attached to the end of a hose, and then the inside of this is normally filled with foam, and that pickup then goes into one of the corners, whichever way you decide to put it, and that is how the fuel cell stays safe and it prevents sloshing. But the problem is the foam degrades over time and causes all kinds of problems. And I took that out because, well, the stuff was expired. Instead, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it. That guy right there, grabbed a light. That guy right there is a pickup, and it's got a screen on it, and it goes to a T, and then, yeah, over on the other side, there's another one. And this is something that a lot of off-roaders use. That way when their vehicles are, you know, at like a 45-degree angle or whatever, they don't get fuel starvation being at that angle and causing all kinds of problems. It's a perfectly fine setup for road use and everything else, but because I'm getting closer to using this car on the track, I have to eventually get those things back to the way that the manufacturers originally intended them, with the foam and their pickup. It's a safety thing. You won't pass tech and you won't be able to race if it's not done the way that the manufacturer intended. For the time being, I am going to leave my setup exactly the way it is. Like I said, my tank's expired, I gotta buy a new one. When I buy a new one, it'll come with a new pickup, new foam, all that good jazz. And then I'll just completely swap it. I'll take the top, transfer it to the new one, and I'll be good to go. So for the time being, to get the car up and running again with all the new electronics that are on it, this is how it's going to be put back together. So let me set you up in a time lapse and let's get this all installed.
Ice in my veins, I've been driving this train years in this lane, there's no stopping this flame. Cause I came to the game and I changed it to play how I like, rearranged it to my own domain. Yeah, I got what it takes, made lots of mistakes, taking shots, skipping breaks, feeling lost, feeling great, popping off, singing straight, never stopped, never changed. All the squad here to play, and I've got something to say, yeah. I work hard each and every day, I get lost in the words I say. I don't push pause, no, I push play. I won't stop till I make a change. I withdraw on the things I make. I turn flaws into flawless traits. I build tall, never capped in space. I won't stop till I hear him say, oh, oh, la, 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 la. And I'm up again. I got tired eyes, need a cup of blend. That's right, in the AM, that's my only friend. No light.
Alright, well that was a lot more work than what I thought it was going to be, because, well, this is the first time that all these pieces are actually being bolted into the car essentially all together. Like, I've never had all these pieces connected all at once. A lot of the stuff has been fabbed in this garage, and while this garage I've had for a little over a year, and the car has been disassembled this entire time. So there was a few issues, and if you're smart and you notice them in the time lapse, good for you. But let's go over them and I'll address what needs to still be done. Alright, well, this is the fuel system as it is supposed to be set up. The first issue that I've had with this thing, and I always knew it was going to be a potential problem, is actually right down here. I got terrible lighting. Those two bulkhead fittings. The reason that they are a problem is they sit relatively flush with the body of the car, which, when the fuel cell cage, which is the part that holds all of it together, when that was originally designed and I had just the fuel cell bladder sitting in that cage, that was perfectly fine. It sat flush, no problems, no issues. The issue arose after I built the box to hold the fuel cell bladder, because the cage was designed for the bladder, and then the box would put into the cage. I ended up having a space issue. So that's the other thing, is if you notice, all the bolts for the fuel cell box or canister or whatever you want to call it, they're all upside down. If you look at almost every fuel cell system out there that has the box, you'll notice that the nuts are always on the bottom side, and that a lot of people build their cages to go around the nuts and bolts. Well, I couldn't do that here, so I flipped all the bolts, put the nuts on top, but then the head of the bolt now spaces up the whole box just by a slight margin. In some areas, because my bend isn't a perfect 90, it doesn't do that, but in just enough places it does do that, and that makes the box higher than the bulkhead fittings, and the bulkhead fittings are close enough that there's not enough room for good, like, flexibility in the fuel lines. So right here, they actually hit. There's no give, no nothing. So this is going to be issue number one. Issue number two is, well, this fuel line that I had originally made and has been good on the car for years no longer works. So now I have to build another one of those lines. So I think I can technically get away with the spacing of the bulkhead fittings, but because I have to buy more AN line, because none of the stuff I have here is big enough or long enough, I might as well just buy the correct bulkhead fittings, which are going to be the straight ones and not the angled ones, and then just put fittings on top of those bulkheads. That'll give me the space I need, and that'll no longer be a problem. The other current issue, because I am using the outdated fuel cell, is this guy. If you notice, there is a gap right here. Now, one of the big reasons fuel cell bladders expire is one, they start to get brittle because of the material that they're made out of and the fact that they're messing with fuel. And the other thing is they actually start to shrink over time. So my fuel cell has now shrank enough that it no longer fits, or maybe my measurements when the canister was made just wasn't on spec. I'm not entirely sure. So that's my second issue with the fuel cell in the back. For that, I think I'm just going to, because it's a small enough space, I think I'm going to build a spacer to fit underneath the fuel cell and raise that portion up so it sits flush. You'll notice that a lot of fuel cells have little brackets on a couple of these bolts that then overhang, and they just sit, you know, in the four corners kind of deal. So after I build the bracket to lift that up, then I will either buy or make some of those little deals so that way the lid and the plate on the top sit flush and they're not going to move around. The last issue with the rear, and there's nothing I can really do about it because my skill's not on that level, I guess. It's not really that big of a deal, but it's going to be this right here. So this gap isn't a gap this way. It's actually a gap depth-wise, if that made any sense. And it's not a big enough gap that I'm super worried about it. And because it is a removable item that I have to take off when I service the fuel cell, I'm okay with it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some seam sealer and make sure that that doesn't have any air getting through it. That way none of the fumes from the vent that's also in that deal get back into the cabin and you start to smell it. Now, because the whole time lapse was for putting the rest of the fuel system back together, I put the rest of the fuel system back in the engine bay. So we have an Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator. This is actually a pretty unique piece because it's good for both carburetor and fuel injection. You literally unbolt the top and there's a set of springs depending on which way you're gonna go, and you can swap from carb pressure to fuel injection pressure with no problem. The other thing here is the Lowbuck Motorsports sensor that'll be wired into the ECU that I built, which I'll get into in a later date, and that way I have constant fuel pressure and not have to worry about fuel starvation because I'll put a parameter in the system for that. And unlike modern LS, I do have a feed and a return all the way back to the tank. The feed is actually this one here, goes through the rails underneath and then comes back to the fuel pressure regulator, which then makes the rest of the system pressurized for hopefully consistent pressure. Now, I did run into the same exact issue I did with my brakes, and that is when I painted the engine bay, I didn't tape off the riv nuts that I had already installed in the car. So I ended up having to go through and buying a tap set because the thread restorer kit from AutoZone doesn't actually have a small enough size for the riv nuts I use. So I ended up having to go buy a tap set and re-tap those riv nuts, which was kind of dumb. But so yeah, that pretty much wraps up the fuel system besides the little things that I have to fix, which I'm not going to video because they are relatively easy to take care of, and I'll just do it on my off time at some point after the parts get here. A couple of quick things before I end this video here. There's been a lot of information, so I don't want to drag this on too long. My fittings came in, so this is what I'm replacing my current bulkheads with. About this nut right here, about right there is where the 90 on the 90-degree bulkheads bends. So you can see the amount of height that I'm going to be gaining from going to a straight bulkhead with a 90-degree fitting instead of having the 90 built into the bulkhead. So that'll definitely fix my spacing problem. If you're curious on the sheet metal, how I bent all the stuff for the firewall, or like the fuel fill like inset that's on the very back of the car, if you're interested in that kind of thing, I do have like a little short video series on some of the other social medias that I'm on that maybe I can condense down. I'm not sure how that's going to work with the cross platform, if I'll get in trouble for that. But you can find them on my other social medias if you're interested in that. Hopefully in the next video, I finally get to putting back the electrical in the car and getting one step closer to getting this thing fired up. But anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. Until the next one.
Do what it takes, I ain't making mistakes like that. I'll put it on your face to make you go take